Okay, hi class. So unfortunately, because we couldn't have live class today, here's your tutorial from Adobe Photoshop. For some of you, this might be better because it should be a little bit quicker than the live session. All right, so I'm going to start off by sharing my desktop with you so that you can just kind of walk through all of this with me step by step. And this is recorded, so you can go through this as many times as you need to make sure that you're getting it right. I'm going to make myself a little bit bigger here. Okay. All right. So, the very first thing that you want to do is open up Adobe Photoshop, go to your Finder, applications, whatever. Sorry, I have two monitors. That's why I'm pulling things from one screen to the other. And here's your Adobe Photoshop launch button. If you don't have access to Photoshop, it is a problem that I have asked you to address to this point. And if you have it, you got to let me know so we can get that figured out immediately. Okay. So this is what it looks like when I open up Adobe Photoshop. And if you will notice, there are things that I have previously worked on down here. And then over here, we have some additional options. We can go to the cloud to see documents that I've put on the cloud. We can go to deleted items. Currently, there are none. Lightroom, that's something a little bit different. If you want to know about that, ask me. But in all honesty, we don't really need to pay attention to anything other than if we're starting a new project, unless we were opening a file that we wanted to see. Maybe a photograph that I took, let's see. Then if I clicked and open the photograph, boom, this is what it looks like when something, for those of you who are not familiar, our Colorado is currently ravaged by wildfires. And this is a photograph that I took about 20 minutes from my house a couple days ago. I have a huge, it looks almost like a volcano, but that is actually a forest fire that is happening near Boulder, Colorado. Anyway, okay. What we're going to do for this class, and what I've asked you to do in your homework assignment, what I've asked you to do first and foremost, even though it's at the bottom here, right, is your final advertisement should be a flattened 8.5 by 11 inches at 155 or 150 ppi, saved as a JPEG file, uploaded to Canvas. Okay, so the beginning of this assignment starts in Photoshop when we create new. And what we're creating is a template or a canvas, right? I like to think of it as a canvas, and that's what they call it. Canvas is what you paint on, if you're unfamiliar with that English word. So you're about to make a painting or a drawing. It's a blank piece of paper. So we're going to create a new one. And I told you that I wanted it 8.5 by 11. Why do I want 8.5 by 11? Well, that is a standard printing size that we use for magazines and all types of different stuff. But it's also the size of one piece of paper, and it's about the average size of a flyer or, again, a magazine article. Now, because I am an American, I use the English system, inches, not centimeters. And so I asked you to make an 8.5 by 11. But if you notice over here, before I don't touch anything over here yet, but right here, first thing I want to do, so that if I need to save it, then Photoshop automatically saves anything that you're working on in the background, so just in case you screw up or do something bad. But it'll save it, so and just in case I lose it, I want to make sure that I can bring it back up and search for it. So give it a name, and we're going to call this one Project 1. You can call it whatever you want. I'm just going to call it Project 1. All right? Maybe for you, you should call it cultural assignments or something like that. Right? Okay. Now, 8.5 by 11, you can do it vertical or horizontal. I'm going to start off by putting in 8.5, and I'm going to put in 11. And now, check this out. I can hit this button, and it'll switch it to 11 by 8.5, or 8.5 by 11. But I can switch it from horizontal to vertical, depending upon what I want. Normally, we say vertical advertisements, but if you have one that works better as a horizontal, then do that. Now, here is my resolution. It is set to PPI, or pixels per inch. PPC would be pixels per centimeter, all right? But oftentimes, and this is a system that the governing bodies of graphic design and art and all this other stuff use, is pixels per inch, all right? So 150 ppi. So right now, the reason that I'm doing this is because this is going to determine the size of the file that I'm using, all right? How physically big it is when I print it out, and then what is the actual resolution of it, right? If I was going to really print this out, I would be doing this at 300 dpi because that is actually the standard that printers use, okay? But I'm going to make, that's a big file, I'm going to make this file half the size by doing it 150. What you see on any computer screen is 72 dpi. And so anything between 72 and 150, you are totally fine to use on a computer and it will look really, really great. But when you go to print it out, it's not going to look as good, okay? But we don't need to worry about that because we're not printing anything. And for this, I have asked you to make this 8.5 by 11, 150 dpi, or standard piece of paper size. The other thing that you're going to do here is that you are going to select RGB color if it isn't already. The other one that might be selected is CMYK. RGB stands for red, green, blue, the primary colors. CMYK stands for cyan, magenta, in yellow, and black. That's what the K stands for, is black. CMYK, again, for printing much larger file. This is for viewing on a computer, so we're going to go ahead and click on the RGB. Your background can be transparent, or it can be black, or you could choose a background color by clicking on this little button, and then you could make it red. And then when you create a new thing, you can make it red or whatever color. For me, it's easiest to just deal with a white background because that's what most web pages are, or a black background if you prefer, but whatever you want. Don't worry about these two things down here. So now you have everything that you need to actually create your canvas, all right? We've got it at 8.5 by 11. I wanted vertical, so now it's at 8.5 by 11. We have our 150 dpi. We have our RGB color. We also are set to 8-bit, right? If you are doing, again, graphic design stuff, you can go to higher bits if you want to, but this is going to just make your files really big. And nothing that you see on your computer screen needs to be at this high a quality. This is instead for gaming and for printing. Okay, either of which, an animation, none of which you are currently doing. Okay, so we've got our proportions here, 8.5 by 11 at 150 dpi, RGB color, white background, just like I want. And now I'm going to hit create. Voila, now my canvas appears, okay? And you'll notice that I have all kinds of stuff happening all over here, all right? So the first thing I want to take a look at is over here on the left. And this is a bar. You can move this if you'd like to put it someplace else. If you're like me and you love to do graphic design work, maybe you have two monitors like I do, and you could slide it onto a different monitor and work over there. Or if you like it where it was, you can just drag it back and stick it on the side. It's usually a pretty good place to keep it. But this is your toolbox. And every single one of these tools does something, and if you just leave your cursor over it, it'll tell you what it is that it does. But some of them have little triangles here in the corner of that box. And that indicates that there is more than one tool that is similar in here. Now, each one of these tools does something very specific, and the vast majority of them you'll never need to use, particularly in this course. So if you want additional information, you can look that up yourself, just like I did when I learned the program, all right? But what I am going to show you is some of the basic things so that you understand how to just kind of get in here and start to play around. Okay, so first and foremost, we're going to use what we call the Move tool. This is kind of like the easy default tool, all right? This just allows you to move stuff. Now watch what happens when I click and I drag. I get a warning. It says the currently selected layer is a background layer. You cannot move a background layer or change its stacking order, blending mode, or opacity. However, you can convert a normal layer and then change these attributes. So what it's asking me now is, do I want to convert to a normal layer? This is a procedure we call rasterizing. No, I don't. I wanted this to be a background. I created it as a background. Photoshop is not drawing in the sense that you're putting marks onto a piece of paper, although it can be. Let me explain. So the second most popular tool is the selection tool. And we have selection tools that come in a wide variety of shapes and sizes, but most commonly we have a rectangle. And so if I click and I hold the mouse and I start to drag around the mouse, you will see that I can create a dotted line square of whatever size I want. Voila. And I let go and it stays the same shape. This is a selection. What I am selecting is the area of my canvas that looks like this. Now I can come over to my tools, let's say our paintbrush tool. And then once I click on a tool, it'll give me the options for that tool up here. One word that you'll constantly come across in Photoshop is opacity. Opacity means how much light can pass through it. So currently we see that we're at 26%. I'm going to put this at 50% and show you what I'm talking about. Also, when I go to paint, the color that will come up will be whatever color is here. And so I want to choose, let's say, a nice blue color. All right, I like this blue. So now I have a brush, and my brush is shaped like a circle. And if you notice, this circle starts to like diffuse, right? So watch what happens when I paint with it. Oh, it looks like an airbrush. Now I can make the size of my brush bigger or smaller. I can switch that here, and I can make the size bigger or smaller, and you notice that it's changing the number here. So now it's this big, or I can simply just hit the bracket numbers on my keyboard. Bracket left goes down, bracket up makes my brush bigger. Now watch what I'm about to do. I am now going to start up here where it's not selected and start to paint the blue, and nothing is showing up. And now when I get down here, what the heck just happened? Why is it more blue here? Because my opacity is only 50%. And so when I go back over top of something that's not 100% opaque, or opaque meaning to stop light, then I start to get this kind of interesting effect, right? Because what I'm actually doing is darkening or going over it almost like layer by layer, like spray paint. If you go very quickly across it, it might just make a little, right? Just like look more like this. If you really start to sit there and spray and spray and spray and spray, then eventually you're going to get a very dark patch, right? Like it is here, okay? And so that's what opacity does. But if you notice, this particular paintbrush I'm using is very soft, right? And it looks blurred or fade out. Well, maybe that's not what I want. So I can change what we call the hardness, and I can put it all the way up to 100. Now watch what happens. I get perfect circles that don't fade at all. Now what happens if I lower my opacity down, right? Now I can start to get even different color, but all based on the same color palette. And as I color back over, it starts to change, right? If I just click this, now this is all happening on my canvas. I am painting directly on my background. If I go over here to my layers, you will see here that I have but one layer, and that one layer is called the background. But in Adobe Photoshop, we deal in layers, and we normally paint and create in layers so that we can manipulate it more. All right, let me show you what I'm talking about. So here we have selected an area, and then I painted it. And let's say that I really like this painting, okay, and I like it just the way it is. I can come up to my selection tool and deselect it. And now this is what it looks like when it's unselected. And as you can see, it's reflected here in my background as a permanent part of my background. But let's say that we did this and I went, oh no, that's not what I wanted to do. I didn't want to put this straight on the background, but I instead wanted to be able to move this around. If I go to my move tool, I go to move, nothing happens with what I just painted. So I'm going to go to Adobe Photoshop and all of your best friend, and that is Edit, Undo. Oh, now the last thing that I did pops back up. And if you notice, it's selected. Cool. Now, while it's selected, I can click the Move tool, and now it gives me a box around it, and watch this. If I start to drag it around, I can now put my selected tool wherever I want. I could even hide it a little bit or put it slightly off the page. Now look at what's happening on my background. It is reflecting exactly where this is going to go. But it still says background, correct? All right. Back to my selection tool. This is more like a stain, right? This is like paint straight onto a canvas. But what if I wanted to make this like a floating box that was just this? I could hit Command or Control and then X to cut all of that image out of there. Or I could right click and I could go to Layer Cut, and then looks what happened. It created a new layer and put that right in there. And now this is a completely separate object than what my background is, and I can do anything I want with it, including make it larger or smaller, constrain to the proportions. If I just click on the edges and start to drag over here, here, right? It all stays the same. Now what happens? Well, if I go to the edge and I click and I hold Shift, now I can screw with it. Now it doesn't stay the same size as it was before. But let's say I wanted it the way it was. I can go to Edit, Undo, or I can hit Command or Control Z, which is much easier. And then it goes back to the way that it was. But this is its own object. It's its own layer. Think of it like stacking things on top of one another, and that's what you do in Photoshop. So, okay, I have a design element that I created using the paintbrush, but that's not really exactly what I wanted to do. Now I want to add a shape. If I come down here, I can select a rectangle, or I can select a rounded rectangle, or an ellipsis or a circle. I can do a polygon, I can do a line, or I can do a custom shape. And when I do custom shape, now I've been screwing with mine, so yours isn't going to look the same, but I can go to let's say wild animals. I can click this deer, and it'll say, how big do you want it? 100 pixels by 100 pixels? Sure. And then look what happens. Boom. I've got this dropped in here, but it's hard to see. I'm going to make it bigger. It turns out I didn't want it at 100 pixels. I really wanted it this side, which is much larger. Right? 957 pixels by 619 pixels. Now I have this object here that, again, by pulling the corners, I can make it whatever size I want. And if I hold Shift, I can start to make it a little short, fat reindeer or a tall, skinny reindeer or whatever it is that I want to do. But what is going on over here? It says Stag 1. So a stag is a male deer, and so it actually has a name. What the hell? What if I click on rectangle and do the same thing and I create a rectangle? Look what it says over here. Get out of here, properties. In my layers. It says rectangle 1. What the heck is going on here? What's going on is that Adobe Photoshop and everything in graphic design, there are two different types of formats that you've never, or maybe you've heard of, but probably not. One is a digital image or photograph. A photograph and a digital image are something that you freeze in time, and they are stagnant. And when you zoom in on them or when you blow them up, right? So if you take a picture with your cell phone, and then you make that picture on your cell phone the size of one of the dorm buildings on campus, what is that picture going to look like? Only from very far away will it look like the picture that's on your phone. When you're up close, it's going to look like huge pixels, right? That's because it's a photograph or a digital image. Instead, how the heck do they get pictures onto the sides of buildings and get them to be that large? They use something that you've probably never heard of unless you're a graphic designer, and that is vectors. In Adobe Photoshop, when you use a vector, it will give you a symbol that looks like this square over here in the corner on your layers. This is letting you know that what you are seeing here is not a picture that is stagnant, but is instead a line that can go on forever. And so what that means is that this isn't a picture. When I zoom in, now watch this, okay? I'm going to take this first thing that I painted, and because I painted it, and it is just a regular layer and it doesn't have the vector symbol in the corner, watch what happens when I start to shift this around. So this is roughly, let's make it about the same size as this rectangle here, okay? And I'm just going to hide this stag. Over here on in your layers, if you want something to be hidden so you're not seeing it, you can just click on this little eyeball and it'll disappear. Or if you're tired of it, you don't want it at all whatsoever, you can click on it and then drag it down here to just delete it. Or I'm going to hit Control-Z to bring it back. You can just click on it and then on your keyboard hit delete. And that'll also get rid of that layer. So we're going to get rid of the stag that we had. And instead, we're going to take these two rectangles that are roughly the same size but look very different. The top rectangle being an actual rectangle and a vector image, and this being a digital image or photograph. Obviously, it's not a photograph, so it's a digital image. Now, when I zoom in on these two objects, look what happens. I start to see the pixels. That's what these little boxes are, right? But they look exactly the same here and here. No difference at all whatsoever. Better yet, to really illustrate this point, and I'll show you another tool, one of the favorite tools that people will use in here is the magic wand. This is a way to select things that are all the same color, like this blue box. If I take my magic wand, oops, I got to make sure that I'm on the correct layer. I can do that by right-clicking, by getting my move tool and right-clicking, or by coming back over to the layer I want and clicking on it. So here's my rectangle. Here's my magic wand. Oh shit, I can't select it, sorry. We'll do this a different way. So I'm going to duplicate, I'm going to make like essentially a copy. I'm just going to highlight it, all right? And now I'm going to create a new layer, which I can do by clicking this button right here, something called layer 2, and then I'm going to come over to my paint bucket tool, and I'm going to color the whole thing in the same color, all right? Then I'm going to come back to my original layer, which I don't want anymore. I'm going to delete it. Okay, so now I have what appears to be two identical objects. One is called layer 2, and I made it by selecting an area of and then creating a new layer and filling that in with my paint bucket. This one I created as a vector. This one here is a digital image or a photograph. And again, when I zoom in, you will notice that they look completely identical. Okay, so What I'm going to do now is get on my selection tool, and I'm going to go to the corner. Let's say, yeah, let's do here, oh, right here in this corner. And I'm going to hold the shift button. Now, if you see here, I'm working on my layer, not on my vector. I'm working on the digital image version of a rectangle, not the vector image. I'm going to hold shift, and I'm just going to kind of manipulate this. All right, or I mean, I'm sorry, hold command. And now I'm going to manipulate this. And how I'm doing this is I'm really kind of shifting around and changing the shape so that it looks more three-dimensional, right? Again, I apologize. You're hitting command on an Apple, control on a PC, right? I'm going to shift around and just start to kind of play with this thing. But if you notice, something is happening, something strange is beginning to happen to my lines. Particularly if I look to zoom in. So now, what the heck happened? Let's go back into my beautiful edge that I just had. Look at this. It's all blurred and it looks absolutely terrible. What the heck happened? All right. So that's what happens when we start to play around and manipulate a digital image. All right. Well, that looks like shit. I'm going to hit Control Z and go back to the way that it was. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing, but I'm going to do it with the rectangle. So I'm going to hold my command or control, and now I'm going to start to do the same thing to this particular object. And I'm going to really make it dramatic and pull it way the heck over here out of the way. But watch what happens when I zoom in here. No blur. Instead, it's just right on the pixels, exactly where it's supposed to be. Go back to the original shape. What I have is a vector. I can make this and manipulate it and squish it. I can flatten it down or make it super big. I can even grab one side and flip it to the other if I wanted to. Let's say that this had an additional element on it. Oh. And if you notice, I can't do anything. So I can make this rectangle as big and as small as I want to. I can shift it around. I can do everything, but I can't paint on it. I can't erase it. I can't use very many tools on it. But if I go to this layer, I can do anything I want to that. I just painted that on there. I painted this on here, right? I can do whatever the heck I want. I can go to my text tool. I can type text over top of it, whatever the heck it is that I want. You'll notice that whenever I use text, it creates its own layer. Text will always be its own layer. That's how you use text. You just put it in there and you write James, that's my name. And if you don't like the font, highlight the font, come up here to the toolbar, select the font name, which is called Futura for this one, and then you can use your arrow buttons to scroll up and down and actually see what the different fonts look like in the word that you actually want to change. You'll notice that your text layer will always stay the same, okay? But I can draw and do all this different stuff to this. So vectors have incredible potential for scale and to make big and to have beautiful, sharp, crisp lines at all times. You'll never get interpolation or pixelation when you start to look like blocks. Digital images will. However, these are huge and they can't do much else to them. These are not, and you can do kind of whatever you want to these things, right? So with this, I can now use my magic wand tool, and I'm going to put the defaults to a tolerance of 32. I'll tell you what that is in just a second. I'm going to hit select on my layer number 2, and look what happens. It selects everything that's the same color. If I click on just this little blob, you'll notice that it selects just it, or just this, right? Because it's the same color. This has a little hole in the middle of it, so it'll select around that. Oh. But let's say that I wanted to select everything, all of these things, which are the same color. I could unclick contiguous, and now anything that is that color, it will select, including the background, except for the object inside, right? Now, if I wanted to, I could go up to my move tool and I could just cut these right out. But if you notice, now this hasn't left the layer. It's still part of the same. If I now hit enter and I deselect, this is now one object and it moves together. Oh, that's not what I wanted. I wanted to completely remove this from the object. So for that, I want to hit Command or Control X to cut it, and then I can hit Control V or Command V to paste it back in. And now I have this as a completely different or separate layer that is now called layer 3. You can also click on the layer, click it once or twice quickly, and then you can rename it if you wanted to. It helps you, makes it easier, however you want to do it. Anything that you write in text will show up. It'll be the same thing. So if I write ICB, you'll notice that once I hit enter or I click off of the object, that it will change. Oh no, it stayed the same. It should. I thought it would, yeah, so it changes it to ICB. So there you go. And that'll always correspond as well. Okay. So these are some just kind of basic things to get in here, but we want to make sure that we understand that everything that goes into Photoshop is a layer. And so what we're actually looking at here is 1, 2, 3, 4 things that are stacked on top of that white canvas. And so we need to select whichever one we're talking about. And if we don't pick it, right, if we go to grab the blob, but I'm on the ICB layer. So if I go to grab the blob, you'll see I'm only moving the ICB. That's not going to go anywhere. Crap, I got it over here. Or you can use, by using your move tool, you can right click on whichever one and it'll give you the option. See? If I go to right click down here, it'll say ICB. Yeah, that's the one I want. Now I'm on the correct layer. And when I have my tool on the correct layer, it will allow me to make it bigger or smaller. Guess what? Text is a vector, so you can make text as large or as small as you want without it becoming interpolated. Now, let's say that you've got some really awesome text that you love, like this isn't a very good text, actually. I'm going to choose, and I'll show you what I'm doing. So I'm going to go back to my text. And I don't like this one. I want a fatter text than that. That was too skinny. All right. Oh, okay. Here's a good text. It's pretty fat. And then I can go and I've got some additional options here. If I make it sharp, that means it'll have sharp edges, or I can make it smooth and it'll round it out a little bit. And if I look here, look at this. I could do heavy. Boom. Makes it even fatter, right? But let's say I wanted to paint on this. I can't. It says no. This type layer must be rasterized before proceeding. Its text will no longer be editable. Do you want to resize it? What does that mean? So when you rasterize something, it means you change it from a vector into a digital image or a photograph. Right now, I can text and change this ICB to say BCI if I wanted to, or James, capital letter, whatever I wanted to, right? But let's say that I really like this ICB, but what I want to do is I want to paint it, and I want to put some additional elements into it. Well, I need to make sure that I have it at the size I want and everything that I want from a vector. So vector is really about getting the proper size without losing any of the line quality or the sharpness and clarity of it, okay? And so this is the size I've decided for my vector, and while it's still in as a text, that I want an ICB to be this big, okay? So I'll set it there, and then I'll hit enter, and now we have our nice ICB. As you can see here, it is still a text document, right? Or still a text object, so I can still write on it, and if I double click it, it'll highlight again. Type away just as it's anything else, all right? But let's say now that I do in fact want to paint this, and just the ICB. Well, I can't paint it. I go to my paintbrush, and it says no. I go to my pencil, and it says no. So what am I going to do? You're going to come up here and click Rasterize Layer. which is, or convert to smart object. Huh. Well, that's interesting. I guess you got to commit it and convert it to a smart object first. And then you can convert that smart object to a layer. All right, so now you have a layer that just says ICB. There is another way in which you could do this. It's still a text layer. What the heck is going on? Okay, sorry. Forget what I was just doing there. Now, if I go to the rectangle and I click this, you'll see that I can go, what? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. I was looking at the wrong menu. Don't click this. Sorry. Just right click on your mouse and then you can go to rasterize layer. So I can rasterize, and now that same rectangle that I had that I could stretch in any way, now it'll start to blur like the image does. Same thing with your text. Right click, rasterize type. Okay, so now if you look, I can actually color over top of it. But what you don't, oh, actually, let me show you a different color for this. I'm going to bring my opacity. This is for my, because I'm selected my paintbrush. This is controls how hard or how much is there. And yeah. So if you notice, I have a hard brush. I don't want that. I want the softer one. So I'm going to choose a soft one. And I'm going to look and see how big it is. Yeah, that's about right. I can make it a little bit smaller by using my bracket tools, right? Make it a little bit smaller. Now watch this. I want to paint just the ICB. So I'm going to click the ICB layer. Got my paintbrush. Well, what's happening? I'm painting directly over top of it, right? Not just the ICB, but completely over, and now I can't even see it. All right, edit, undo, Control Z, don't want that. Instead, I'm going to use my magic lasso tool, and I'm going to select the black ICB letters of my layer, and now I'm going to go back to my paintbrush. Now I'm going to do this. Now I'm going to paint just where I want the paint. Use my brackets to make it smaller. Now I can go to the selection tool, or I can go to my magic wand and click inside, and that'll deselect it. But if it's ever selected, you can also just hit Control D for deselect. And now look at this. Now my ICB is fancy, right? Oh, I don't want that part though. I forgot that that was in there. Well, here's what I can do. I can take my selection tool and I can just put it around it and hit delete. Gone. Or let's say I just wanted a little bit of this gone. I made it a little bit too big. I can go to my eraser tool, which is right here. No, where's the eraser at now? Oh, here we go. I can go to my eraser tool, and now I can start to erase. And if you notice, it's blurry. Why? Because my brush is. I don't want it to be blurry. I want it to be hard. Okay, so I can push up the hardness, and now I'll start to erase it. And what I'm erasing is a layer, so it shows up directly behind it, right? So basically, I'm just eliminating this. And I can also go big and just kind of quickly do it if I wanted to. Or I can be very precise. If you need to be precise with something, this is where your magnifying glass comes in. Zoom in on whatever it is that you're working in. Zoom way in if you want to. Now come back to your eraser. And you'll notice I didn't change the size of the brush, but compared to the object, this is way too big. So I'm going to bring my brush way down. Way down. I'm going to erase with precision. I can even zoom in by holding Command and pressing the plus and minus, like so. See this little hand? That shows up when I hold the space bar. And then when I click the mouse and drag around, it allows me to move onto my canvas and see where I'm at. Whatever I put in the middle, if I hit Control plus, I'll zoom straight into the middle, Control minus, straight back out. Right? So let's zoom way in on this. So far in that we can see each individual pixel. Oh my goodness, we're really close. Now, what do you think we're going to do here? We can make individual. If you notice here, I'm only at a 2 point, and look how small it is. So guess what? That's as small as a brush goes. And guess what size a brush is? Roughly the size of a pixel. And if I click delete, look what happens. I can delete each, if I overlap, it'll take a little bit off of another one. But I can delete individual pixels as is. Isn't that interesting? All right. So that's for more precision stuff. All right. So these are just some of the basics. Play around. One of the things that you're going to want to do is bring other objects in. So let's say you have a photograph that you have saved, that you found on the internet. Save it to your desktop, and then go to Open. Then find your photograph. Let's say it's this photograph. All right. And you want to bring this photograph into this assignment, or this particular project that you're working on here, right? Go to your selection tool or your move tool, click the whole thing, and then just drag it over to the project and let go. Oh my goodness. I'm going to hit Command deselect to get rid of that selection that was previous up here. Now look how much bigger than the canvas this picture is. Why is that? Well, because the picture was at 300 dpi and your canvas is only at 150. So you can just make it a little bit smaller, and now your picture will fit however you want. You can also manipulate this picture. If you hold Command, you'll start to really screw it up and make it look interesting or odd or like it's coming at an angle. But you'll notice that the quality of the photograph will begin to shift. It doesn't quite look as sharp as it previously did. And you'll start to see some blurring of the edges, right? Why is that? Call that interpolation. And that's because that is a photograph or a digital image instead of being a vector. Okay. I'm going to shrink this down. And you can do this with anything. And here's something that's really interesting. If you go to the internet, and let's say that you do a Google search for plane, and you go to images, you want this picture of this plane. You can go and click on the website to go to the picture of the plane. And when you see it, when you get here, it's very hard to get this image to show up. Or that's an actual movie. I should have known better than to click on a stupid news site, so that would act like that. All right. Oh, that's again from CNN. Well, CNN has so many pictures of planes. Okay. So I want this picture of this plane. I can go to the website. Oh my God. Stupid internet. All right, let's just say this one. I can right click on it, and I can hit copy image, and then I can go back to Adobe Photoshop. And then I can paste that image. Look at that. And it'll give me the full-size image as well. That's directly from the internet. And I just stole that, right? I just hit Command C and then Command V to paste it. And boom, I just stole that right off the internet. Now, each one of these layers, let's say I wanted this to be up here. I would just drag it and pull it to the top. The other way that I could do it on the keyboard is those same brackets that make my paintbrush little and big. If I hold Command and hit them, they will start to move the layer up and down over top of the other objects that are on the, right, all the way to the top, all the way to the bottom. What you'll notice over here is you can't go beneath the background. That's why that is there. If you're curious what a transparent background looks like, I'll show you. So another thing you could do is if you, the color of the, here, we're going to make this a layer 0, okay? So now I actually have no background. I have a layer 0 that's just all white, and I'm going to delete it. Now watch what happens. This is what a transparent background looks like. So if you prefer this to the transparency, you can use that. And if you save it as a PNG file, it'll save it as a transparency so that you can upload it onto a website or something else in the shape, right? So if you wanted this ICB to be shaped just like this, you would save it with a transparent background. And you would save it as a PNG file. And then that would leave it as just the ICB. Whereas in this class, everything you're going to do, you're going, when you're all done with it, you're going to save it by going to File, Save As. And now you're going to save it as a Photoshop file wherever you want to. And then once you've done that, what you're going to turn into me, you are going to flatten. And now everything is the background. And then you're going to go to File, Save As. And you're going to change it to a JPEG. And then you're going to save it. All right. If you have questions, comments, or concerns about the tutorial, please reach out, and I am happy to help you. Or I'm going to do office hours now, so you can hop into that if you have other questions. But yeah. All right, everybody. See you next week. Bye.